sports. So we're going to start out with a nice fastball to each of you. It's going to be easy, and then we'll kind of warm up a little bit. So Charleston, talked a lot about Charleston, distinct culture that shapes how people do business and they connect with each other. What would you say is a trait that is Charleston that's helped influence the way that communities have been built there and it's emerged as a hub for startups and entrepreneurs? I'm going to start with Stanfield and a virtual coin toss.
I would say the ability to absorb newcomers and create events like this and opportunities and really cool things that everybody is welcome to attend, and they're very open-minded about it, has been an incredible asset, really. And it was part of DigSouth's thesis from the beginning, was the idea of not being myopic, not being about just Charleston or just South Carolina, knowing that we had to, if we're going to raise capital, if we're going to really elevate and scale startups, that we need to also invite people from Boston and New York and Wilmington and Raleigh-Durham and Jacksonville, et cetera. So I would say just our ability to integrate great folks into the ecosystem.
All right. What about you, David?
Similar. I think Charleston has become a lifestyle city. So a lot of people have moved there, but are still employed wherever they're employed. So New York, Boston, DC, Charlotte, Atlanta. But what that's done for Charleston is to bring really talented, experienced people from all different sectors into the city. So I think that it has spurred a lot of innovation and access to knowledge, to people, to money, and so forth. So it's good for entrepreneurship because there's a lot of different resources to tap into because of that.
Makes sense. So in thinking about an ecosystem like Wilmington, like Jem mentioned, wanting Wilmington to be distinctly itself, what could Wilmington take from sort of what you guys have seen in the growth of Charleston, and given the leverage that this community has, what do you think about what could Wilmington be doing?
I think Wilmington's probably already doing this, but there are successful entrepreneurs in this room and in the Wilmington area. And for those folks who have built companies, successful entrepreneurs, to stay here and really help the younger generation or the new entrepreneurs that are looking to do what they did. So instead of focusing elsewhere, really help the community here with their experience and with their access to capital and everything that they've accomplished, to stay and nurture the environment.
Gotcha. And what about you? Anything for Wilmington?
Well, I'm not as familiar with the industries that are based here, but in Charleston, 20 years ago, we had a lot of advanced manufacturing companies, starting with BMW in the upstate, and then of course Boeing and Sprinter Van Lines, Mercedes is affiliated with that, Scout Motors, 6 tire companies, all of that. Well, fast forward to today, and many of those companies really are tech companies. Initially it was just thought of kind of assembling things, but now they're into robotics are very important, AI analytics. So I think we've been able to tap into supply chain and log tech companies this year that we haven't in the past, because they view themselves as being more entrepreneurial. Sometimes that's an entrepreneurship within the company, but also scaling a company like Gnosis Freight, for example, is really focused on tracking and predicting how freight will flow and creating new efficiencies around that. So I would say whatever you have in this environment, within Wilmington, that can be nurture companies that you can bring in. Maybe historically you thought of them as manufacturing, but today they may be viewing themselves much more as technology focused or tech-enabled, tech-powered companies.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that for what we tend to see, so sort of in the triangle ecosystem, as we pay attention to areas, as you start to see personalities emerge in ecosystems like Asheville or Wilmington, Charlotte, and some of the deep tech stuff, some of the blue tech stuff that's going on here is starting to really make ripples, and we're hearing a lot about it back towards the home front. So really good points. I'm going to go to Stanfield for this next one. In case folks didn't know, I am truly sitting beside royalty. Jem let me know that, I'm going to read this so I get it right, that Stanfield was one of Time Magazine's list of the 30 most influential people who are evolving the South. That's pretty big time. As I understand it, you've been inspired by a whole host of really fun things, punk rock, civil rights movement, list goes on. For you personally, have those interests helped shape how you approach ecosystem building in Charleston and beyond?
100%. I started my career in the music business, and I worked for a producer that produced like Buddy Guy, Modest Mouse, and a lot of cool bands. And I never separated in my mind technology from the creative side. We wouldn't have the iPod without music or content to put on it. We wouldn't have Spotify and Netflix without the ability, to distribute content. And so I didn't see that distinction, so that was really fun for me to think about, okay, well, here's what we did in the studio and with the adoption of Pro Tools, and then we saw music streaming come online. Well, let's pursue it from both sides. There are creatives here, there are technologists here, those integrate, there's an intersection. Let's bring in, people of all backgrounds who can cross-pollinate those things, and I found that to be not only a pretty effective way to build a community, but fun, just more fun,
Very nice. And I'm going over to David for this one. So Jen mentioned earlier sort of the FOMO aspect of big exits. So Charleston had some, blackballed and others. Wilmington's had some too. And so I guess the question to you is, in thinking about those major exits, sort of for you and your day job over in the VC world, what do you guys look for as you read about exits, and does that start to pique your interest in certain communities as you look at possible portfolio companies?
Yes, I mean, we are aware of where the companies are situated and what support structure they're going to have in their communities. But there's also the virtual aspect of things. And a lot of our companies have folks that are all over the place, and they're almost virtual companies. But it's always valuable for them to tap into local resources, whether it be another successful entrepreneur to attach themselves to on their advisory board, or as an investor that can guide them through those processes. For the communities or cities that do have successful businesses that have either gone IPO or been acquired and so forth, that's always great for the community, because there's capital that's coming in. Those businesses typically will grow dramatically after that exit happens in most cases, and the talent pool that is attracted to those places, the whole community benefits from that, because that talent pool is sometimes transient. They pop from here and there, and putting that city on the map as far as wow, that's really great that their company was able to have that success in that location.
Yep.
So it takes away that stigma of, oh, that's a small town, how can they have scale to support a business that would be that successful? That's really, it's a bad stigma, and a lot of small cities suffer from that, which is these days, especially with the virtual aspect of work, isn't really relevant.
Yeah, we used to.
Before we move on from that topic,
Yeah.
the local companies were Encino, Untapped, and the gentleman who snuck in the back, Todd John with Player Space. Todd, if you'll wave your hand. So he was the third exit of the company. So that's the example that we're setting, like Charleston had Blackbaud and Benefit Focus.
Yeah.
Well, yes, the granddaddy.
Yeah, and going back, Dave, you mentioned sort of the remote hybrid, like how companies are so spread out now. And I think we all saw a lot of this start sort of during COVID, when folks went offline and sort of a lot of them moved different cities. And it sounds like Charleston, as well as Wilmington, Asheville, and other places benefited from some of that talent that was historically in places like Raleigh or other areas.
Mm-hmm.
They went to prettier places, and they went to Wilmington and Charleston and settled down there. Has that, on the investment side, has that affected sort of how you meet companies, or have things moved more digital in that way as well?
Yes, I think it's affected everything we do in regards to access to deal flow, access to investors. There's, if you would have asked me this question 10 years ago, I would say that Charleston was a capital desert. But it's far from that now. I mean, you have so many people now that are there that are investing. The angel investor pool is much larger. There's funds. There's more funds now. There's more incubator and accelerator type programs. There's everything that really when Stan started out and when all these things came together, didn't exist. So this has happened fairly quickly. And having And now in this virtual world where you have folks that are able to work in Charleston but have, you know, businesses and jobs worldwide, it opens up, those channels open up for everybody that's in that community. So yes, the digital transformation and all that's happening has been very helpful.
Yeah, we were very grateful to have Good Growth announce their $102 million fund at DigSouth several years ago, which gave us a great, you know, a nice bump, and them as well, and it helped the community kind of get perspective on their fund and what's possible. There's even a $2 billion fund, you know, based in Charleston now, but they only invest in, look at deals that are 100 million and greater. So we don't have those in Charleston, but it's nice to know that is possible to get that meeting if someone achieved that level.
Mm-hmm.
But I will jump on what Jim said about, it was about 140 million, I think, that those companies raised in the last year, but the vast majority of that money came from out of state. And so, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's just the reality. You know, they had to look broadly, nationally, to raise those funds.
Gotcha. And turning over to DigSouth, that most folks know what that is, but I'm hoping you'll tell us a little bit about DigSouth and what makes it so special, and maybe some of the changes over time, as well as what's coming up sort of for Charleston Tech Week, and maybe to get a little information to folks about that.
Yeah, so in 2012, I was frustrated that there weren't more entrepreneurial, you know, opportunities, especially tech focused in Charleston. I've been out in Silicon Valley a couple times and, you know, met with friends. I thought about moving there, but my wife had franchised multiple businesses and we loved the lifestyle. You know, we wanted to stay in Charleston. So basically at that time it was what John Yeary called a BYOJ, a bring your own job city. You know, you had to get creative and make it up. So I thought, all right, well, you know, and I run events. I led the first mobile app project for the College of Charleston right after the advent of the Apple Store and, you know, and cloud computing. And I went to the Ad Age Digital Conference in New York, South by Southwest, and I thought, why don't we have this in the Southeast, something like it, you know? So that was the idea, was to create a little mini South by Southwest. We launched in 2012, had the first event in March of 2013, and I got in my car and drove around the Southeast. You know, I went to Raleigh-Durham and the American Underground. I met with economic developers. I went to the Miami DDA. I went to the Nashville Entrepreneur Center. I just got on the road and said, what are you guys doing? You know, would you come to Charleston if we launched this kind of event? People got really excited about it. You know, Dave was with Cap A, I think, at the time, and everybody said, yeah, let's try it. I mean, a lot of people thought, oh, there's no tech scene in Charleston, you know, it's not going to work. And we had really Benefit Focus and Blackbaud and Spark at that time and a couple of other very small shops. And the community just rallied and helped us and said, no, we do have a tech community and we're going to launch that. So, you know, fast forward 13 years later and we've been able to make it work and have pivoted to a membership base and a lot of other types of programming. We've aligned with the Harbor Entrepreneur Center. We do a series with them called Coffee with Closers right now and other programs. So, you know, we just had to keep a broad awareness to make it work. And, you know, fast forward to today, and Charleston has a great tech scene, has great funds based there and other things, but I'm not going to pretend it was easy in the early years. So.
And DigSouth this year is May
1st and 2nd, yes, digsummit.com, but May 1st through 2nd, we'll have 6 tracks. We'll have an AI film festival, 30-second film festival, which is really fun, a mentor matchup with women in tech. We'll do an investor VIP event. We have an author, Benjamin Wallace, who spent 15 years searching for Mr. Nakamoto, so it's about the history of Bitcoin and crypto, and that book comes out March 16th, so he's already a best-selling author. I think this one's going to hit pretty strong, so we'll have him. Then we're doing Charleston Tech Week. We're launching this year with about a dozen organizations from April 24th to May 2nd. The idea there is hopefully we're going to be much greater. You know, the sum will be much greater than the parts, lift all boats, you know, use your analogy there, but I really believe that we just need to activate the people that Dave was describing that are like hybrid, remote, etc. Maybe they have a vacation home in Kiowa and they're not aware of all the cool things happening in the community. So that's the idea there, is to, like, you know, pull them out of the woodwork, say, hey, this is happening, come check it out in a concentrated 8-day time period, because it's 8 days a week, right? So Charleston Tech Week.
Awesome. And David, over to you. In thinking about things like DigSouth, I bet there's a ton of events that you guys could attend. You know, it's great sitting up here with sort of a venture capitalist, because whenever we do these talks, the lawyer's the least interesting person in the room. So sitting with a venture capitalist is fantastic. Can you talk a little bit how you think about attending events and bumping into folks? And if anybody in the room is trying to, you know, make good decisions about maybe events they want to attend as well as DigSouth, where are you spending time? Or how do you guys look at your schedule and events?
Yeah, you're right. Every city has their tech event or what have you. DigSouth's the natural, of course. It's in Charleston. We look at the ones that draw entrepreneurs in the sectors in which we invest. So I'm not saying one is good or bad, but CED in Raleigh is fantastic for us because we invest in life sciences, physical sciences, and data sciences. And in Raleigh-Durham area, it's a good base for that. Atlanta is more fintech and more consumer focused and stuff like that. So although a much bigger conferences and so forth, it's not really as much on our radar. Same with Nashville has a little bit of a slant with healthcare, so that's attractive to us. And then in Boston, we have a second office in Boston with a partner there, and that's always been a hotbed for us. But the ones in Silicon Valley, New York, South by Southwest, some of these mega events and conferences, we really have found that it's not the best use of our time because we're pretty niche and focused, and we're not one of the big giant funds that's investing all over Silicon Valley and so forth. So it really isn't a match for us. So we look at, does it match our early stage deep tech investing sort of thesis?
Awesome. And to follow on that, deep tech, can you talk to us about sort of where you're seeing those hubs pop up and maybe where you're going and searching for companies or meeting ones that are interested in that area, what it kind of has been for you guys?
The areas that typically have a lot of deep tech are ones that have either major research institutions or a lot of university, which are research institutions in and of themselves. So Raleigh-Durham is an example again of one with you have Duke and Carolina and NC State and a lot of deep tech research happening in RTI and some of the other organizations.
Can we ask you guys to talk a little louder?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the universities and other research institutions are more prevalent in certain regions and certain communities and cities. Those are ones that attract us more because that's where a lot of, I'd say 75% of our companies that we invest in are coming out of a lab from somewhere. And what was the other part of the question?
Yeah, you're.
I'm old.
You're
so
good.
I
We were
can't
saying like in terms of
remember.
you're going through. Oh goodness, you were going through sort of your good growth's focus on some of the types of companies they're investing in, and just sort of what deep tech, what you guys are looking for and thinking about.
And also in the physical sciences area, that's where I spend most of my this is advanced materials. These are advanced manufacturing. Silicon Valley isn't a hub for advanced materials and advanced manufacturing necessarily. Denver is a lot of aerospace and stuff, and that's interesting to us. Again, North Carolina has a lot of this. A lot of the East Coast and Rust Belt and Midwest has a lot of medical device and life sciences expertise. So a lot of these regions aren't necessarily on the map as big tech hubs, but for us, it's where the corporations that have been doing advanced materials for almost 100 years, that's where that talent resides. And so that's where we sort of play.
Gotcha.
That's where a lot of that is.
Yeah, that's often one of the things about here in Raleigh-Durham is some of the big companies that are there, right? That everybody's moonlighting. You get the folks out of IBM or Cisco, they're doing the nighttime stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of the area grows and kind of compounds on itself because the talent they're starting new companies and new ventures and sort of spinning out in some ways from these larger companies. That makes a lot of sense. Over to you, Stanfield. In terms of thinking about Charleston, obviously we know some of the areas, we've highlighted some of the areas they've done well in historically. What's the next thing coming for Charleston? Like we've read a lot about some of the focus on AI and other things. What would you say is coming next?
I mean, the advancements we're seeing in supply chain are very interesting. There's a new break bulk freight company based in Charleston that has rock piles, as they say, or business on 7 continents. And it's very interesting to me. Gnosis Freight is scaled. They have private equity backing now. There are, Move Flow, company I'm a partner in, is headquartered there as well. And so, I'm seeing a lot of movement around 7 or 8 different companies in that particular space. There are a lot of creative agencies. They're not really MarTech firms, I wouldn't say, but they're deploying and using AI in creative ways. I'm not exactly sure what's next. I mean, there have been a few exits recently with Boomtown and a couple of other companies, Ignite Digital. Some of that team came from Atlotl, spun that up. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Louder. Talk a little louder, please.
Sure, yeah. I'll pretend I have a microphone.
Okay, that's good.
No, yeah, I'm really not certain
Yeah.
exactly which one will come out in a dominant form, but I think the health and strength of the community right now is there are so many different interesting companies. I'm not sure if we have to have a singular focus, or if that will just organically arise.
All right. I'm going to ask David to crystal ball a little different way. So you probably get this on every panel you're on, but sort of looking back, so talking about venture capital in 24 and then looking forward to 25, can you share maybe a couple of trends from 24 and what you're thinking as best you can about 25 and the industry overall?
Well, any trend in 24, I hope just goes away and we forget about it. I do see things getting back to, I call it movement and activity, versus what happened in 23 and 24. We're seeing now, finally, venture capital firms investing and writing term sheets and leading deals and so forth, versus this this time of purgatory where startups are having to do bridges and extensions and so forth because no one's writing checks, no one's active. We see a lot of signs that's turning around. One of the key things for a venture capital firm is the future exits, so the exit activity. So M&A, private equity, and the IPO market. Obviously, the IPO market is one that we don't really put our vision on. Usually, it's a strategic acquisition that most of the companies would exit through. But again, it's still very important for the IPO market to pick up because our investors rely on that in a lot of different aspects. Mm-hmm. And so when we're like a startup, every time we raise money, we get out there just like you all do and talk to our investors. And it's been very difficult in the last couple of years. And not because of anything bad we're doing or early stage deep tech investing is doing. It goes everything. It goes into interest rates. It goes into the IPO market almost at a halt. It goes to private equity and M&A activity. Those things need to pick up, and then capital starts flowing from the top, which ultimately comes to us, and then ultimately goes to you. So there's a lot of those economic drivers that you wouldn't think affect us as much as they do, but they do.
I think,
But I think it's turning. I see a lot of signs that things are opening up.
I think Dave's response dovetails into your question to me. That's why we're not seeing any particular sector, I think, arise. The deal flow was slow last year.
Yeah.
There's already been 6 exits in the triangle. There have been 6 startups in the triangle in a month, in the first month of 2025.
See, there you go, yeah.
They're those year-end deals that kind of kept going. The busy Q4. Yeah, that's a really good point. Sometimes people don't draw the link between exit activity and venture activity. Sometimes folks say, hey, lawyers, what are you guys seeing on the financing and funding side? And you can almost reverse engineer sometimes. What did you see 6 months ago related to the exits? And what sort of capital is being reinfused into the LPs to then invest into the funds?
Right.
It's a really good point. I'm going to turn it over to you, Stanfield, and talk about podcasts. I've learned that you host Southpod?
Used to
host.
So
Okay.
we still record that during the summit.
Gotcha.
Based upon the speakers, but that was about a 7-year endeavor.
Wow.
And it was great. It was fun. We were doing podcasts before they were all the rage.
And what was it? What were you sort of highlighting in the podcast? Was it?
It was very founder focused, and we would take it to Venture Atlanta, and we would take it to QC FinTech in Charlotte, and interview the companies all day long just about their perspective on what's happening in the region. It was called Southpod. And it does arise once a year, and it's kind of resurrected at DigSouth Tech Summit, and John Nearian will typically interview 20 to 25 people that day and just kind of check the pulse on what's happening at the summit that year with founders.
Very cool. So once a year it comes back to life, but your podcasting career is on pause for a little bit.
High burnout factor there.
Understand.
Is anybody else running a podcast now? There you go. Yeah, that's why it's rough to keep it going.
Yeah, I completely understand. Over to you, David, and this is going to be probably another can of worms for the group. I heard the word valuation earlier when someone was saying, oh, there's going to be an investor. Can you talk to the group, for those that are starting conversations with investors? There's obviously sort of host of things that you have to nail out in that process, but one of the ones that we get asked a lot that we're not probably as helpful on as we wish we were is the conversation around valuation, particularly for early stage companies, right? For companies that haven't raised multiple rounds of capital, don't have sort of that stair-step look to them yet. How do you guys talk with entrepreneurs about valuation when you get to sort of the part where you're thinking about writing a check?
It's a very good question. Valuations, yes, there's been some adjustments in a lot of different sectors, adjusting valuations down, especially at the Series A and later stage. Valuations are very important for an entrepreneur, but also important for an investor to understand the long-term effects of an early stage valuation. So if you're an entrepreneur and you find an investor wherever they are, that gives you a very high valuation for a seed round, for instance. Great, wonderful. I only was diluted 10%. But guess what? That next group of investors that come in may look at you to say, okay, in order for you to increase the value from your previous round, you need to, you want a 2 or 3x valuation from that previous round. Well, you're not a $30 million company right now. If you were a $10 million seed company, the metrics get tougher and tougher as you proceed. So you have to look ahead. Is it smart to be valued at $10 million when you're a pre-seed or seed company? It is if you're never going to have to raise another dime.
Yeah.
But it's not smart because you might price yourself out of future capital and have to do a down round later. On the flip side of that, a lot of investors want to go in and get the lowest valuation that they can get. And that's also dangerous because you don't want to dilute the founders too much because they're going to have to raise multiple rounds moving forward. So if you dilute that founder too much, and then the next round they're diluted another 25, 30%, and they're left with hardly anything. And what's their motivation? So you need to make sure that there's enough capital for an option pool for those founders, for that team that continues to motivate them and make sure that they know that there's a big check at the end of the day when they exit versus everybody else except me is gonna make money. So it's a balance. Valuations, they are important, but it's also very difficult at the early stage to value a company because you don't have EBITDA, you don't have, sometimes if it's new deep tech stuff, you don't have comparables. Because you can't say, I'm going to point out Nala there. I mean, there hasn't been an innovation in RO membranes for 50 years. So you don't have a lot of comps to base any valuation on. And also, you especially at the early stage. So a lot of these science-based companies that are really transformative science, we have to sort of pick a valuation, but look at the future capital needs and really do a model of, okay, they're probably going to have to raise this much next and this much next before they're acquired. So, and then backtrack that down to what is reasonable for that company at that stage.
What do you think, Stanfield? How to negotiate with David?
Well, I'm not an investor, so I would point them to somebody a lot more knowledgeable than myself. But that's why we built a network, a community. So we have a membership base of people that are very good at that, who've had multiple exits, valuations. Of course, I know Dave. I've sent many people to good growth, over the years, and so really that would be my role as more of a relationship builder and referring them on to someone else.
Makes sense. We're going to turn to pivots. We got about 10 more minutes. Can you share with us, Stanfield, something that you've done where you had to, made a mistake, pivoted, saw a startup pivot, and what maybe the group can take from that?
Thousands, right? Every day of the week. No, I mean, obviously the one that we all experienced, the pandemic, was particularly brutal for events, event-based businesses. And, in our case, we had to pivot that first year. Fortunately, and I've got to, give a tremendous thank you to all of our sponsors and partners that stayed with us, that didn't say, we want our money back. They didn't abandon. I think maybe we had one company that wanted to refund, and everyone else stayed on and said, whenever you can come back, whenever you do it, this fall, we're in. And it was fantastic. And that is really special about Charleston, and hopefully about Wilmington as well. People would continue to stay with you. But I would say that year, we did it fully remote as a hybrid event. We kept pushing through that. Then we expanded our membership base and made it a year-round model so that we realized that connectivity was really important beyond just people parachuting in. And then honestly, we changed our focus and thesis where we used to have some bigger names and some bigger companies from California and New York outside of the region that would kind of parachute in. That might seem neat, and maybe it gave you a bump in ticket sales, but they weren't people that you could do business with. They probably weren't gonna, stick around more than that day. So we really focused on companies in the region that were scaling and doing well. And I thought, well, maybe this woman, her name isn't well known. They don't know the company, but she's a great founder. They've got 30 employees now. This is an interesting company that should be at DigSouth because she's going to do business with people in Atlanta and Raleigh-Durham and Wilmington and Charlotte. So we really shifted from 2019 to today to put our focus more on who's in the region that's kicking ass, that should be there, and that we'll do business with.
Makes sense. What about you, David? I know from startups you watch, can you give some examples of a startup that you invested in and maybe thought things were going to go one way and they pivoted hopefully successfully?
There's been multiple pivots in multiple companies. When you're investing in a core science-based business, there's always first the challenge of which market do you go after, which end-use application. So sometimes they'll pick one or two and they're just not hitting, and then they realize that, wait a minute, there's this market over here that's quicker to market, let's focus our resources that way. So that happens a lot. Sometimes the pivot can be a technology that is applicable in many areas, and they take a completely different direction. One company in particular is a company called Dynapic, which was a Charleston-based founded company. They were in the data security space for apps, but focused on children.
Okay.
Meaning making apps safe for children, but also the governance and oversight of what children have access to, what apps. Okay. You would think that would have taken off, and they had the only platform out there that was available that was doing this, but the market just didn't. They couldn't really get traction. Then they determined that their app, that what they were building was applicable to AR and VR, an AR and VR platform to deliver and manage access to training content.
Okay.
That's proprietary. And they started working with the U.S. Air Force. The founder was from the literally rocket science. She has a PhD in rocket science. So she went back to her roots. And now they're a $20 million company with tens of millions of government contracts. She moved out west because that's where her client base was.
Okay.
And now she's one of the shining stars in our portfolio. But for 3-4 years, she struggled with finding that product market fit and determined we need to pivot. And she made a good pivot.
And 12 years ago, this was Chris Awatry. She won our very first Wild Pitch event. Wow. So, the founder out of Charleston, jumped on stage, crushed it, and here she is $20 million later. It's great. Trading more on getting some revenue in.
Interesting,
Proving that model before raising funds. That's the advice I hear.
What's your answer to that, Hannah?
We hear the same thing. So I think that's fair. Anything, David? Or just that? Well said.
Doing quick, safe rounds and convertible note rounds is the ticket to getting capital. yes, it's easier, but too much of that really messes up a cap table and hurts you when you're out there trying to raise a real seed or a Series A if you've got all these notes and safes. And some investors will walk away or say, clean that up, clean your cap table, and then come to us. So, but a lot of people that are advising are throwing these safe notes, uncapped safes, and so forth, and then investors grab to that. But it's not really the right structure to build a company and a capitalization that is going to work at the later stages.
Yeah, or you've sold 35 notes to your friends and family who are unaccredited, and now they're going to become 35 stockholders in your cap table.
Yeah, things
yeah,
like that.
we see a lot of that too. All right, what is your take on AI? Or would you say overhyped or game changer?
I would say that it's the corollary to Mark Andreessen saying software is eating the world, AI is eating the world
Gotcha.
now. And so I see it rippling through every single business we work with in some capacity. Is it right for everyone at this moment? Probably not. But every business has to be aware of it, has to have a strategy around it, or I think someone using AI may replace their company if they're not paying attention to it.
I'd say that AI, the mistakes made early on, and some mistakes got billions of dollars of funding, but they were too general in their approach. They really weren't specific into what value or what's the value proposition. What is the specific application for that AI versus this broad thing that's going to solve all the world's problems. So the trend now is to utilize AI, find a specific application that has value, and that's what you focus on. Instead of, we have an AI platform that can solve your company's entire problem, which was the pitch 2 years ago. So as specific as you can be with AI is great because it's useful, it's game changing in a lot of different applications, and we're seeing that. So those are the ones that we get pitched AI all the time, trust me. Or development of pharmaceutical materials that do X, Y, Z. If it's specific, it's great. It's a good application, and those are the ones that I think will succeed.
Yeah, it'll speed up drug discovery, and I'm seeing it used. I know 3 companies using it in the legal space.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah,
And
definitely.
Anna, don't worry, you still have a job,
Yeah.
because we like you.
As
We'll
of
make
right
sure
now.
you still.
As of this moment, yeah. What about if you guys were trying in a few words to say what is the most underrated trait for a successful startup founder? So something that you see founders, what would you say a common trait is that makes them successful?
An underrated trait. I can tell you some overrated traits.
Like when you see those folks and you say they really are awesome and I want to invest or be in their world because this is what they're doing makes me think they're going to be successful.
I think curiosity might be underrated.
Okay.
Whereas some people think focus, drive, and all these other factors, they're very important, but I think curiosity is what enables you to when you get knocked to the ground, to get back up and say, well, okay, maybe there's another turn here, another way around that. We all use the term pivot. But I think being curious beyond your narrow focus sometimes can be the saving grace.
Awesome.
I would say not to an extreme, but, and I call it an engineer mind, where you know what that technology needs to do before it's ready for market. You don't want to develop it forever, but you don't want to put it out to market too quickly. So sometimes the typical entrepreneur will sell something doesn't even exist and not going to exist for 2 years. The right entrepreneur is one that really thoroughly engineers a product to MVP that actually works, that has security around it, that has, all these things have been thought through, it's been tested and so forth. But again, not too much. And I've done a lot of investing prior to Good Growth between Europe and the United States, and that was the one trait that was different between a European entrepreneur and an American entrepreneur. The Europeans were very, very thorough in their product development, but almost to a fault. They've gotten a little bit more like we have, which I think that's a good balance. But that's an underrated trait of somebody that really wants to make sure it's right, wants to make sure it actually works, so that when they go out there, they don't lose customers, they don't lose, they don't get a bad reputation and so forth. So
Very cool.
that's one I would say.
All right, last question for you guys. So if I am in the audience and I'm really excited because I've heard great things from ecosystem builders and venture capitalists, and I want to start really leaning into my business, growing it, hopefully get funding. I don't have great connections. What would you advise them? How would they start that building process of getting into the ecosystem? Who should they be trying to look for to help them?
I would say LinkedIn is obviously a very good resource. You have to be not afraid to pick up a phone or to somehow ask for a connection, and just pick up the phone sometimes. And also people have forgotten that we have pens and paper and an actual physical letter sometimes. I tell you, if an entrepreneur, instead of emailing me, if I got a FedEx package with a pitch deck and a nice handwritten note, you betcha I would pay attention to that person.
That's
I mean, it's something that no one does anymore. It's like a thank you note. You can get a thank you email reply, but you get a handwritten note, you're going to remember that person. The other thing is you always take a meeting. Even if it's somebody that you're like, I don't think that, why, but if someone wants to introduce you to somebody, take that meeting. You never know who that person is going to know. That person could be a future customer, future investor, future vendor, whatever, or a connection. So it may not appear to itself something of value to you, but whoever led you to that person probably knows something different. So always take a meeting, pick up the phone, write a letter, forget email blasts, and so do that, I guess, if you want, but go the personal route.
Very cool. What about you, Stanfield? What would you say to folks trying to get more connected?
I would say stop using the phrase, "Can I pick your brain?" unless it's with purpose. And what I mean by that is, why are you asking that person for their time? Because the time is the most valuable thing we have. Like Dave, I take all meetings. I take, crazy number of meetings, and it's been super helpful, and I love it. But when a person comes to me and they're like, they already know a little bit about what we do, and they've done a little homework, they've looked at least at your LinkedIn profile, and they've prepared a little bit. They've got thoughtful questions. If they sit down and all they want me to do is tell my long, boring story, that's not helpful to them or me, because I don't want to tell that same story again, and that's really not why we're meeting. They're probably, just like what's the phrase? Well, it's just getting to the point, but lead with the need, I guess, is great. You don't need to necessarily ask right away for something. You might be offering something to me as well, but think of it as a value exchange. Mm-hmm. I'm sharing with you, you're sharing with me. I'm very interested in your story, but I would say come with something other than I just want to pick your brain. Very
good advice. All right, I'm going to let Jim know that was almost exactly 45 minutes. No need to tase anybody.
Yes.
And a big thanks to you guys for being willing to do that. I think Jim's going to open up to some questions now.
I have a first question for Stanfield is, can anyone ever top the buzz of having Gary Vaynerchuk at DigSouth? What was the buzz in the room? I think everyone here knows who Gary Vaynerchuk is, but talk about the buzz in the room that he created, and probably filled another 200 spots in your event.
First year we had, and we did a giant tented event at Cinnabar, and used all the theaters, the parking lot. He drove, he flew to Atlanta, drove pretty much all No, sorry, I'm mixing it up. He drove in, it was at dark. The next morning, Charleston had the highest single day of rainfall since 1959. I mean, it was like, it was a crazy monsoon. It's hard to exaggerate. Water's pouring in under the tent, soaking everyone's shoes. He shows up, he's soaked. And he gets up there and does his, his magic, and he's very charismatic. He stomps around. The second year we had him, he flew. His connecting flight was canceled from Atlanta to Charleston. He had to rent a car, drove all night, no sleep, no shower. He was the kickoff keynote. He just showed up and did it. Now, what I will say about him, though, that makes him such a pro is he stomps around, he drops F-bombs, he's funny and all that on stage. We've seen that, but behind the scenes, he's very generous, super generous with his time. He talks to everyone, any questions you have, anything we wanted him to do, he was game for. Really, had great suggestions. When he did an author signing, he talked to every single person, like as long as they wanted to talk, like they were his best friend. He gave them individual time, and it was 200 deep, and so I was really impressed with his professionalism off stage, but everybody knows him for being, the wild man up there. But behind the scenes, he's very generous.
A piece of advice, you ever go to a book signing, try to be the last person in the book signing, because you will get as much time as you want. That's what I did with Gary Vee.
Yeah, well, he did.
I was the exact last person in line, and he signed a book to George at Untapped. And I had been stalking him online, and he goes, "I know you." And he signed a book.
Crazy Uncle Jim.
That's right. Crazy jackass Jim. Yeah. All right, who has some questions? Scott?
Obviously, there's been a pretty enormous uptick in the number of venture funds in the last 15 or so years. Not all venture funds are equal in size, in reputation, in the value that they bring to the table beyond the capital. And it's effectively a business marriage between a founder and a VC fund when they invest. But I think due diligence is a two-way street. It's a little bit easier for investors to do the due diligence on the startups. But what advice do you have for founders looking to raise money, and how do they uncover information about who they're taking money from as investors?
That's a very good question, and one easier one is to look at their portfolio of companies and picking ones that may resemble what you look like, I guess, size, stage, and so forth, or location. Get a hold of those founders and ask how, what's their experience been with that investor. Looking at how active they are in those as well is important. How will they do diligence on us?
I know for us, David, when we have companies that are raising capital, one of the first things we'll do when they come to us and say, "Hey, we're thinking about raising from one of these three funds," and we won't we're in the term sheet talks with a couple of them. What can you guys tell us about them? And often we haven't interacted with those investors yet, but we can, for example, pull pitch book reports on them. We can do certain things to get some biographical information to see what kind of deals they're doing, what size checks they're writing, to get them some information to reverse engineer a contact even before they get sort of past the term sheet stage of who they might be talking to. There are resources like that.
Yeah, PitchBook would be a good resource for that. And also to understand how, is it a one-off investment, or are they going to stay with you? Do they do follow-on rounds? Do they, put money in and then put more money in and more money in? Those are the dream investors, because that as you continue to grow, they're there for you and they have more capital. That's one thing. And PitchBook and Crunchbase would be a good source for that, because they would show multiple investments. But I think talking to other entrepreneurs that have experience with those firms is probably your best avenue.
Who has the next question? Adam?
So you talked a little bit about underrated traits. It looked like you wanted to talk about overrated traits a little bit. When you're looking at the entrepreneurs that you've worked with, maybe not even just traits, but are there certain actions or behaviors that you see people do that they think are adding value, but they never end up doing, or see, different actions that just end up being a waste of time for entrepreneurs, but that they keep continuing to do?
One overrated trait is and nothing against a successful entrepreneur, but just because they had a successful startup doesn't mean their next one's going to be successful. And you look at some of the companies that have been very successful and it doesn't work the next time. It's great that they had that experience, but don't put that above a person that's never done it before. And in some cases, somebody that's never done it before is going to be more coachable, is going to want to learn, is going to listen, and is more of an open mind. So that's one overrated trait. Another one is, the Class A personality that just is a little bit much, a little bit extra. That works in some circles, but in technology investing, it doesn't work too well. You really also have to assess a founding team in regards to, is this a science project? Or is this like something fun they're doing? Or is it really something that they're gonna do this somehow, and they're gonna be persistent and make this happen? And it's hard to assess that, but if you can somehow assess that person, maybe it's looking at their past history to see how focused they've been in the previous things. Assess whether that person's going to be able to withstand the hard work and the bumps and the peaks and the valleys and the difficulty that they probably have no idea they're walking into. That's something else to keep in mind, and also realistic expectations. If they come to you to say we're going to go public in 5 years, it's probably not a realistic expectation. Ask them. We ask entrepreneurs when and how do you think you're going to exit this business? The more prepared they are for that answer, gives us a really good feeling that person understands what they're getting into and understands the paths that they're going to have to take and how long it's going to take and how realistic the time frame is going to be.
Do you like having the exit in the pitch deck?
It doesn't have to be in the pitch deck necessarily, but because we'll ask them that. It's something though that should be discussed.
They need to have
in
an answer
regards
ready
to
for it.
not only their expectation of when and how but also who and what type of company what is going to acquire you, or how are you going to exit, or because that's what in our mind we need to exit at some point. We're not in there forever to be part of an operating business that operates for 30 years. That's not the model. But then again, we're not looking to flip this company in a year.
Yeah.
But we need to have a feeling that the entrepreneur has some realistic expectations and it matches with our expectations.
Those are 4 really good answers.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Important is the why to you.
Is the why? What do you mean?
So Simon Sinek talked about the why you do something, why this company's doing something.
It depends. Sometimes we'll meet an entrepreneur that had a bad experience in their life, and they want to fix that experience, and that's commendable, and we like that. But what's more important is there a business there? So we don't invest in the why. The why is good it's a good part of that entrepreneur's motivation. And like I said before, why are they doing this is important because are they going to stay in it? But just because they see a problem doesn't mean necessarily that anybody cares about the solution. Does that answer your question?
But I think the why can add to the storytelling component, the narrative. A lot of great companies, you'll see the evangelist or the founder or the CEO is a great storyteller, and a lot of times the why can inform that.
Right here, Richard.
Yeah, you mentioned 2024, you don't want to see it again. So as you're into 2025 now, what indicators are you looking at that's going to give you confidence to deploy your capital again? Are you looking at deal flow, equity markets, sector specific? What's gonna get you to start deploying capital?
What we see, when we see other venture capital firms investing, that's a good sign, okay? And it's good for us. Because venture capitalists, especially, I mean, we're not Anderson Horowitz, we can't lead a $30 million, $100 million deal. A lot of syndication has to take place. And when we see strategic investors and other investors interested in a company, that makes us more interested. Not because of the FOMO, just because of the validation. And even more specifically, when we see the corporate world more aggressive with a company in regards to wanting to do pilots, potentially writing checks as an investor, wanting to do NRE arrangements and so forth. That's a good sign for us. We can add so much value. I mean, we're not necessarily a customer of that startup. We have some deep expertise, but we can't have expertise in every field. So when we see other people with the right expertise that we feel is a match stepping up and doing something, that's a really, really good sign for us. As far as the other question part of it with capital markets and all this, when we see political and or larger market indicators that are in favor of entrepreneurs and startups, that helps us free up capital. There's a lot of, like for instance, there's something going on right now where, and this has been a threat forever, where carried interest in venture funds is no longer going to be considered a long-term capital gain. That doesn't help anybody. And that doesn't help the entrepreneur, because that really cripples the money coming into venture capital, for instance. So we look at those things. And if that happens, it's going to change venture capital. And it's going to change it for the worse as far as the free movement of capital through venture capital, through the venture capital model. Things like that you wouldn't think affect us and ultimately you are important.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yep.
I was curious, when looking at entrepreneurs and founding teams, how much attention are you paying to the leadership potential and growth potential as the company goes from early stage to A to B and goes from just a few people to potentially hundreds? Is that something you're looking at assessing their leadership skill set of the team, or is that something we got to get through this stage and then we'll kind of address that later?
I'm going to answer from how we look at things, and it's not probably the same answer another venture capitalist would give you. It depends on their thesis of investing. Our thesis of investing is getting into really hardcore science, moving it into commercialization, and having ultimately an exit shortly thereafter by a company that then scales it. Okay, that's our preferred model. So when we invest in an entrepreneur, obviously they need to be able to manage people and bring in and attract talent and so forth. But do we look at that company, that person, and say, okay, are they going to be able to manage a 400-person organization? No, because we don't anticipate that any of our companies we're going to have holdings in companies that have 400 employees. They're going to be gone by then. So that's from our perspective. I think one thing that we do like to see in a founding team or a founder is one that is willing to or already has other people on the management team that have some power, just beyond one person. When you have one person that holds all the power and all the decision making, and they're not planning to build a team at their level and only a team's subordinate to them, that can be dangerous. So we like to see people that know that, okay, I need to bring in somebody to run this part of it, and they need to help me with decision making and so forth. So that's something we look at.
Before we go any further, Lydia, how much time before we want to shut this down?
I'm good till whenever you guys want to go to the game.
Okay.
she's responsible for shutting the building down, so I didn't want to keep her too long, because she has a life too. So, Mauricio, I believe you had a question?
Yes.
Yeah, so appreciate your interest in the sciences, and with the evolving landscape of government funding for sciences and research, do you see opportunities emerging for private investment? What do you see the role of VCs in filling that potential gap in investment?
Yes, and there seems to be, well, I guess there appears that there is going to be a lot of cuts in a lot of grant funding and research funding and so forth. When we talk to entrepreneurs, we love that kind of funding. It's non-dilutive funding, it helps the companies and so forth, but when we assess a company, we put that over here to try to understand, is that company going to be able to do what it needs to do without these grants, without this type of government support? If the answer is yes, then it's very favorable. If we see something that is solely GovTech right now, or solely going to rely on government grants and so forth, we've always been, very cautious about that.
That gets back to that science project thing, where
Yes.
is a science project a hobby, or
yeah.
are these people gonna bust their backsides
Right,
to
right.
make it a business?
Make it a business.
Yeah.
Same has to do with subsidies and tax credits and carbon credits and all this kind of stuff. Those are fine and great, and they can help a business, but it's not the reason to invest in a business, because they have access to those things.
There
That's
was
how we
one more
look at it.
question I saw.
But I'm sorry, but are we positioned to try to fill that gap?
So where do you see where private investments or VCs could really capitalize on the change? Is it gonna shake out the real winners? Is it gonna make it easier for you to be able to spot hey, these are the ones that are really gonna shine despite the reduced investment? Or do you think it'll hinder the landscape for new ventures to come online because they won't have that initial investment?
I think it'll hinder to a certain degree, but at the same time, it might also drive that company to focus on the business side of things and say, you know what, we just don't have that anymore, and so we have to get to market sooner, or we have to really get to the commercial customers and the commercial applications faster. So in some cases, it might actually be a tough love, a sort of a kick in the pants to say, we need to do this anyway, versus relying on this easy gravy money. But at the same time, I'd say 75% of our companies rely or have significant grant funding and government funding, and it is going to hurt. It's going to be hard.
Stanfield, I have a question for you. Are you still on a rolling deadline for DigSouth, or can the companies in the audience apply, or is it?
They can, if they do it by tomorrow.
Leave
Yeah,
now, go do that.
Right, yeah, so digsummit.com, yes, we're still reviewing the company. What I will say is we have the wild pitch with 15 companies that will be accepted from, all over, mostly the Southeast, but around the country. And then we do mini pitches in the Startup Demo Lounge, sponsored by Nelson Mullins, a law firm. And those are little 5-minute pitches. So that's a great way to, bring a group over to check it out during the summit while you're attending, and you get your 5 minutes. It's not on a main stage, but it's still access to people that could help you.
And a Wilmington company has already been selected, so
Yes.
that's good news. They are inclusive of Wilmington. Mr. Emmel in the fancy socks over there.
Thank you. David, you touched on a couple of areas around the sciences that you invest in, and you touched on policy. If there was something that you could recommend in either DC or in the state capitals that would help the industry and what you're working with, what would that policy recommendation possibly be that would help catalyze the companies with whom you work?
Oh, that's a good one.
And I don't need the answer today.
Yeah.
The reason I ask the question, I think that's something that we should all be thinking about in the years to come. If we want to be the best center of innovation and entrepreneurship in the world, we're going to continue to need to do things better. And so what are the opportunities to continue to do things better? And those are things that are happening here in Wilmington, in Charleston, in the Triangle, but we also need to go ahead and have those policy initiatives. The SBIR program was created in '82 with funding starting in '83. What's that next stage? What are those next endeavors so that we continue to bend the curve at a global level? Because resting on our heels means that China and other countries may continue to be aggressive. What do we need to do to continue to be the leaders of the world?
I don't know how this would be accomplished, but there are certain corporations in the world that are our best friends and invest a lot in entrepreneurship and innovation. There's many corporations that don't, or say they do, but they really don't. I wish there were something in, maybe it's, I don't want to say a tax credit, because that's a typical model, but something where corporations are required to maybe take a portion of their profits, or required to a certain degree of whatever they do to invest in third-party innovation and entrepreneurship somehow. Even corporations that have CVCs or corporate venturing arms, you think that they're doing their thing. Well, yeah, some. Especially in the communities in which we live. Because, Atlanta has a great corporate support structure.
Tech Square Ventures is awesome.
All those, and the corporations that are in Atlanta are pumping money into that ecosystem.
Yeah.
In the state of South Carolina, I have to admit, it's been a struggle.
Yeah.
And to get those companies to really invest in the community and in the talent pool and entrepreneurship and innovation, and they need to do more. And I think North Carolina is a ton better than South Carolina.
Yeah.
But
The Triangle and
Yeah,
Charlotte do it.
I would like to see that more and more and more.
That's an excellent question. I want to piggyback on that. So in Atlanta, I've been to the Comcast Accelerator and TechStars, Coca-Cola had one they funded for a while. There's a media accelerator that Cox Industries funded. And all of those were very business focused. They weren't like philanthropic endeavors where they're just giving grants to someone. And they're successful, interesting programs. They're expensive. In South Carolina, we'll give, we've got Redwood Materials, a $2 billion investment. We've got Google's expanding their data center, and we'll give them enormous tax breaks for the land around that. And they'll throw some money around to some nonprofits and the land trust to offset some of those things, but they put zero into entrepreneurship, as far as I can tell. And now, granted, they're not headquartered in South Carolina, whereas Atlanta has 25 Fortune 500 companies headquartered there.
Well, and so to that point, the Tech Square Ventures model, so Blake Matten's a friend of mine from college. The Tech Square Ventures model, where what they did, all right, what's your area of strength? And so what they did in Atlanta in that particular regard was you got all these Fortune 500s that are based there. He went ahead and raised initially a $100 million fund to go ahead and do that, but then brought in the corporates as early stage customers for the companies that were going through the fund. And they hooked it in with ATDC, which is a state-funded incubator.
Yeah.
And so how do you go ahead and build your ecosystem off of your strengths to go ahead and really propel it forward? Let's go ahead and figure out what our strengths are to go ahead and do that. Y'all have done a phenomenal job of that here in Wilmington, and thanks for going ahead and sharing the fabulous lessons learned from Charleston.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what happens is that the entrepreneurial ecosystems end up becoming R&D for the big companies. And maybe we should be promoting ourselves as such to say, hey, come here, we're your R&D. You don't need to spend all that money elsewhere. You can buy the next technology coming out.
Last question in the back.
The question part of that too is your.
Can you stand up and speak louder, please?
Is your M&A and then your private equity, and what I'm starting to see and hear now is how private equity is starting to get into entrepreneurship and VCs as partners as your growth strategy, so you can turn around and sell your company and then still be a part of it as it continues growing up. And in the private equity side of it is almost like this pyramid where it's like they take it, this company takes it here, they sell it to the next company, and you as a founder and your team can still kind of participate in that growth structure, even though you lose like the ownership majority of it and all of that. But have you guys seen that in your investments from like the early stage to VC crossing over to private equity, where founders, or you just completely sell it off 100%, but is there somewhere founders and the team kind of move forward with it in that growth strategy?
That's becoming more prevalent. So private equity, the problem with private equity is that their deal flow is there's not enough funnel of healthy companies for private equity. So they have all this capital. So they are going downstream. They're also looking at a lot more what's called an add-on acquisition, where they may have a holding in a company and they can't acquire a company that does $1 million in revenue. That doesn't work their model. But one of their companies that they hold can. So there's a lot more of the add-on acquisitions that are happening. The secondary market is something we haven't talked about today. Secondaries have always been around, but in the last probably 4 or 5 years, they have exploded. Secondaries are where they will take holdings from a venture capital fund, and they'll let us exit even though the company hasn't exited. So they're not a private equity firm, but they're a secondary. They'll come in and build a portfolio of holdings, and then wait it out longer for exits. They get a good discount, but it's helpful for venture capital and early stage investors to be able to exit that investment without affecting the company and forcing an exit from the company.
Okay, guys, can we give a big thank you to our